the space where language learning meets personal growth. I'm so glad you're here. Let's explore how to train not just your English, but your mindset, too. Have you ever noticed that we tend to avoid the very things we know are good for us? Waking up early, speaking up in a meeting, learning a new skill, having that uncomfortable conversation. We tell ourselves we want to grow, to improve, to level up. But when the moment comes, we hesitate, we scroll, we find something easier to do, or we just don't. Now, isn't that strange? We're intelligent, rational people. We understand that doing hard things builds resilience, confidence, and character. We've heard the quotes, "No pain, no gain." Growth begins at the end of your comfort zone, and so on. But understanding something intellectually is not the same as acting on it emotionally. That's the paradox of avoidance. We want the benefits of challenge, but we resist the experience of discomfort. It's like our brains are caught in a loop, a kind of internal tug-of-war between who we are right now and who we want to become. Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cold swimming pool. You know that once you dive in, you'll feel refreshed. You'll feel proud of yourself. But your mind hesitates. It's too cold. Just wait a bit. Do it later. That hesitation, that's your mental resistance. A quiet, persistent force that keeps pulling you back into what feels safe, even when what's safe is also what's keeping you stuck. I sometimes think of it as mental gravity. This invisible pullback toward comfort, routine, the familiar. Your brain, after all, is wired for survival, not necessarily for growth. It loves predictability. It loves efficiency. And pushing your limits, well, that takes energy. It takes risk. It takes conscious intention. That's why we avoid it, even though we say we want it. But here's the question I want to open with today. What if the resistance you feel isn't a sign to stop, but a sign to start? What if it's not a warning, but an invitation? An invitation to cross your growth edge, that invisible line between comfort and transformation. Think about it. When was the last time you deliberately chose the harder path? Not because someone forced you to, but because you knew it would shape you? And how often do you catch yourself slipping into your own avoidance loop, repeating the same behaviors, telling yourself the same story, day after day? You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're just human. But being human also means we have the ability to change our patterns, to retrain our responses, reframe our inner dialogue, and choose growth, even when it's uncomfortable. This episode is about how to do exactly that, how to train your brain, not just to tolerate hard things, but to lean into them, even love them, or at least love what they do to you. Because real growth doesn't come from doing what's easy. It comes from meeting yourself in that moment of hesitation and choosing, just for today, to step forward. The neuroscience of discomfort. Let's take a moment to look under the hood, to peek inside the human brain and understand why discomfort feels so, well, uncomfortable. Because once you see what's really going on behind the scenes, it becomes easier to work with your brain instead of constantly fighting against it. Now, your brain, as impressive and complex as it is, isn't really designed for your long-term personal growth. That might sound strange, but it's true. Your brain is designed first and foremost for survival. Not success, not happiness, and definitely not productivity. Its number one job is to keep you safe, alive, and out of danger. That's it. In fact, in many ways, You can think of your brain as a sort of high-tech survival machine, constantly scanning your environment for threats, trying to avoid risk, and conserving energy wherever possible. So, what happens when you encounter something challenging? Let's say you're about to give a presentation in English, maybe at work or in class. Your heart starts to race. Your palms feel sweaty. You feel nervous, exposed, maybe even a little panicked. Why? Because to your brain, this situation feels uncertain. It involves social risk, performance pressure, and potential failure, all of which trigger a built-in alarm system called the fight-or-flight response. This is the same response our ancestors experienced when they heard a rustle in the bushes and had to decide, is that a tiger or just the wind? Today, the tiger might be an email from your boss or the fear of looking foolish during a presentation, but your brain still reacts as if your survival is on the line. It releases stress hormones like cortisol. Your focus narrows, your breathing changes, and without realizing it, you start looking for the nearest exit, an excuse, a distraction, a way to avoid the discomfort. This is where mental resistance kicks in. The brain, in its effort to protect you, interprets discomfort as danger. But here's the catch. Discomfort isn't actually dangerous. It's just unfamiliar. It requires effort. And effort, biologically speaking, comes with a cost. It demands what we call cognitive load, the mental energy needed to process new information, make decisions, and regulate emotions. And your brain, clever as it is, doesn't like to spend more energy than absolutely necessary. So when it sees a hard task, it often says, let's not. And this is why, even though we want to improve, we often sabotage ourselves. It's not about laziness. It's about the way our brains are wired. The brain prefers predictable neural pathways, routines and behaviors that have already been reinforced through repetition. These are like well-worn hiking trails in your mind, smooth, easy, and familiar. Trying something new? That's like hacking your way through a jungle. It takes more mental effort, and your brain would really rather not. Now, let's talk briefly about dopamine, the brain's feel-good chemical. Most people associate dopamine with pleasure, but that's only part of the picture. Dopamine is also about motivation. It's released when your brain anticipates a reward, not just when you get one. This means your brain actually gets excited by progress, by movement toward a goal. But here's the twist. Dopamine isn't automatically released when you do hard things. It's released when you believe those hard things are meaningful. When your brain sees a connection between effort and reward. So, if your internal narrative says, "This is pointless," or "I'm not good at this," or "Why bother?" then guess what? Your dopamine levels stay low and your motivation drops. On the other hand, if you learn to associate effort with something positive, growth, learning, self-respect, your brain begins to respond differently. It starts to link discomfort with purpose, and that's where change becomes possible. Let's pause for a second. When was the last time you felt resistance towards something, but did it anyway, and then felt proud of yourself afterward? Maybe you went to the gym even though you were tired. Maybe you studied instead of watching YouTube. Maybe you pushed through a difficult conversation. In those moments, you weren't just building willpower. You were actually rewiring your brain, slowly creating new neural pathways that say, hard things are worth it. And this rewiring process, this quiet, powerful transformation, is how people begin to love challenge. Not because it's easy, not because it's fun in the moment, but because they've trained their brains to connect discomfort with growth and growth with something meaningful. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. It takes awareness, it takes repetition, and it takes a willingness to feel awkward, uncertain, even afraid, without running away. But the science is clear. The more often you face a difficult task on purpose, the more your brain adapts. The more it learns that effort is not something to avoid, but something to engage with. So the next time you find yourself stuck, procrastinating, hesitating, overthinking, try this. Take a breath. Notice the resistance and remind yourself that your brain is just trying to protect you. You can thank it and then choose anyway. Because your brain may be wired for survival, but you are wired for so much more. Comfort versus growth. A false dichotomy. There's a story we've been told, and many of us believe it without even realizing. It's the idea that comfort and growth are opposites, that you're either relaxing or improving, that you're either taking it easy or working hard, like you can't possibly do both at the same time. But is that really true? Let's take a closer look. In most motivational speeches or productivity advice, we hear things like, "Get out of your comfort zone," or "Nothing good ever comes from staying comfortable." And sure, there's some truth there. Growth usually involves challenge, but over time, this message has become a kind of unspoken rule, a false binary that says, you're either growing or you're comfortable. Pick one. But life, as you know, isn't that black and white. The world isn't neatly divided into easy versus hard, comfort versus discipline. In fact, sometimes the most powerful growth happens when we're able to find a balance, when we create a space where challenge and ease coexist, not compete. Think of a good workout. You don't go into the gym and immediately lift the heaviest weight or run until you collapse. That would injure you, not help you. What you do instead is find your stretch zone, the space just beyond what's familiar, where your muscles and your mind are being pushed, but not overwhelmed. Too little effort, and nothing changes. Too much, and you burn out. But just the right amount of challenge? That's where real transformation begins. And here's something that might surprise you. Building resilience doesn't mean living in constant struggle. In fact, emotional flexibility, the ability to shift between effort and rest, tension and release, focus and relaxation, is actually one of the key indicators of long-term well-being. The most resilient people aren't the ones who grind 24/7. They're the ones who know how to lean into discomfort and lean back into rest without guilt. You don't have to suffer to grow, but you do have to stretch. This is the nuance many people miss. Growth doesn't require pain, but it does require stepping beyond your automatic patterns. It requires you to be intentional, to notice when you're holding back simply because something feels unfamiliar. And it requires you to question that internal voice that says, if this is uncomfortable, it must be wrong. Let's pause here. Think about the last time you avoided doing something. Not because it was impossible, but because it felt unfamiliar, uncertain, or awkward. Maybe it was asking a question in English, applying for a job you weren't 100% qualified for, or simply starting a habit you've been meaning to build. The truth is, many of us stay in our comfort zones, not because we're truly comfortable, but because we're afraid of failing, looking foolish, or losing control. But here's the irony. Comfort zones aren't always comfortable. Sometimes they're just predictable. And predictability feels safe, even when it's keeping us stuck. Now, that doesn't mean we should constantly push ourselves to the limit. Growth doesn't mean burnout. It doesn't mean living in constant stress or forcing yourself to hustle every minute of the day. That's not strength. That's imbalance. What we're really aiming for is intentional growth, the kind that's rooted in self-awareness, not self-punishment. And here's a key mindset shift. You can design your comfort zone to include growth. You can build habits, environments, and routines that support your development in a way that feels natural, sustainable, and even enjoyable. This is where the idea of resilient comfort comes in. Comfort that expands rather than confines. For example, let's say you're trying to improve your English. If you only study when you feel motivated, or only speak when you're completely sure of every word, you stay stuck. But if you build a small daily routine that challenges you just a little, listening to a podcast like this one, repeating a tricky phrase, writing a short paragraph, you're gently stretching your capacity. You're growing inside your comfort zone because you've made that zone bigger. You've redefined what feels natural. This kind of growth doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel heroic. But it is deeply powerful. And over time, it changes the way your brain responds to challenge. Because challenge becomes something familiar, something you've practiced, something you've made room for. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking, I can't grow unless I'm uncomfortable, or, if I'm not struggling, I'm not making progress, try asking yourself a better question. How can I stretch myself gently today without snapping? Because growth isn't about extremes, it's about direction. And every small step you take toward the edge of your current limits, not beyond them, but toward them, is a step that tells your brain, I can handle this. I'm expanding. Identity and internal dialogue. Let's slow down for a moment and turn inward. We've talked about brain chemistry, motivation, and the myths around comfort zones. But here's something that sits even deeper beneath all of that. Your identity. The story you carry about who you are. And just beneath that, your internal dialogue, the voice in your head that interprets every challenge, every failure, every small victory. If you really want to train your brain to love doing hard things, this is where the work begins. Now, I know that phrase, internal dialogue, might sound abstract, but it's actually something very real. It's the voice that says, I'm just not that type of person, or I've never been good at this, or I'll probably mess it up, so why even try? Sometimes that voice is loud, sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it sounds so familiar that we mistake it for truth. But here's the thing. You are not your thoughts. You are the one listening to your thoughts. And just like we can train our muscles or upgrade our habits, we can also reshape that inner voice, the one that influences what we try, what we avoid, and what we believe we deserve. Let's make this real. Think about something you've avoided doing, something that felt too hard, too uncomfortable, or too far outside your comfort zone. Maybe it's public speaking, learning a new language, starting a business, or setting a boundary with someone close to you. Whatever it is, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this? And even more importantly, what story am I telling myself about me? This is what we mean by internal narrative. The collection of beliefs, assumptions, and emotional memories that shape your self-concept. It's not just what you think, it's who you believe you are. And whether you're aware of it or not, Your self-concept influences how you show up in the world. It guides your decisions, your risks, your habits, even your body language. Here's an example. If you believe deep down that you're not a disciplined person, what happens when you try to build a new routine? You might start strong, but the moment you miss a day or feel resistance, that belief kicks in. See? I knew I couldn't stick with it. And suddenly, the behavior stops, not because you're incapable, but because you're reinforcing a limiting identity. This is what psychologists call identity-driven behavior. We tend to act in ways that align with how we see ourselves, even if that identity is outdated, inherited, or inaccurate. And this is both the challenge and the opportunity. Because once you start rewriting that identity, even in small, subtle ways, your behaviors begin to shift naturally. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you caught your inner voice in the act? When you paused, even for a second, and noticed yourself thinking, I can't, I'm not ready, or this isn't me. And what would happen if, just once, you answered back with something different? Something like, maybe I can, or what if it is? The stories we tell ourselves are powerful, but they're not fixed. They can be updated. They can be questioned. And often, the biggest breakthroughs don't come from trying harder, but from thinking differently about who we are becoming. And yes, I say becoming because identity isn't a destination. It's a process. You're not locked into the version of yourself you were 5 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago. Every decision you make, every time you choose to show up, speak up, or stretch beyond your usual limits, you're voting for the future you. You're shaping a new narrative. Of course, this isn't about toxic positivity or pretending that fear doesn't exist. It's about creating a more honest, compassionate internal dialogue, one that makes room for growth, for effort, for change. You can be someone who struggles with self-doubt and still takes action. You can feel fear and move forward. You can challenge yourself without attacking yourself. So here's something to reflect on. If your brain believes what you tell it most often, what are you feeding it? Are you reinforcing old doubts or rehearsing new possibilities? And if you could write a new story, one sentence just for today, what would it say? Maybe something like, I am a person who does hard things, not perfectly, but consistently. Or, I'm learning to trust myself, even when it feels uncertain. Or maybe just, I'm growing. Because that voice in your head, that's not just background noise, it's the script that directs your life. And the beautiful thing is, you're allowed to rewrite it. The role of micro-challenges. Let's be honest. When we think about doing hard things, most of us picture something dramatic. Climbing a mountain, running a marathon, launching a business from scratch, moving to a new country. And sure, those are big, bold challenges, the kind that change your life story. But what if I told you that the most effective way to grow isn't through one massive act of courage, but through small, consistent acts of deliberate discomfort? You see, your brain, the same one that resists change and craves efficiency, doesn't need grand gestures to start adapting. It needs repetition, it needs evidence, and it needs clear signals that say, I can handle this. That's where micro-challenges come in. Think of them as bite-sized training sessions for your mind. Small, intentional actions that push you just a little bit past your comfort zone. On purpose. These don't have to be painful or extreme. In fact, they shouldn't be. The goal isn't to overwhelm yourself. It's to create a new habit loop, a predictable cycle where discomfort is met with action, and action is met with confidence. Over time, this loop becomes familiar, less threatening, even satisfying. Let's look at a few examples. Maybe you take a 30-second cold shower in the morning, not because you love it, but because it teaches you how to stay calm when your body says run. Or maybe you practice saying no to something small, like an invitation you don't really want to accept, just to remind yourself that your boundaries matter. Maybe you speak up in a meeting, even if your voice shakes. Or you try saying one sentence in English every day, out loud, even if it feels awkward. These are all micro-challenges, and every time you do one, you're training your brain to respond differently, to discomfort, to effort, to uncertainty. Here's what makes micro-challenges so powerful. They're low stakes, but high impact. They're small enough that you don't need hours of preparation or a surge of motivation, but meaningful enough to shift your self-perception. After a week of tiny wins, you start to see yourself differently. You start to think, maybe I can handle more than I thought. That's where real change begins, not in the moment of success, but in the quiet rewiring of your self-concept. And it all starts with one question. What is one small thing I can do today that makes me slightly uncomfortable? In a good way. It's important to note that this kind of intentional discomfort isn't about punishment. It's not about making life harder for no reason. It's about controlled exposure, stepping into challenge with curiosity, not force. You're not trying to prove something to the world. You're simply building mental and emotional flexibility, one repetition at a time. And this approach works especially well when combined with what psychologists call incremental change. That means focusing on progress, not perfection. If your goal is to become more confident speaking English, don't try to memorize 500 new words in a week. Start by using one new phrase today, in a message, in a conversation, even just by repeating it to yourself out loud. If your goal is to be more focused, don't quit all distractions overnight. Try working for 10 minutes without checking your phone. Then increase it gradually. These micro habits, these small shifts, compound over time. And eventually, they become your new normal. You're not just practicing discipline, you're teaching your brain that effort isn't scary. It's manageable, it's familiar, and sometimes it's even enjoyable. Of course, this isn't magic. You won't suddenly fall in love with every uncomfortable thing you do, but you will start building a kind of quiet confidence, a sense that you can trust yourself to face resistance and move through it instead of avoiding it. That's a powerful skill, and it's one that stays with you for life. So here's your gentle challenge for today. Choose one micro-challenge. Just one. Something that makes you stretch, but doesn't make you snap. Something that gets your attention just a little. It might be uncomfortable. That's the point. But make it doable, repeatable. Something you can actually practice. Because in the end, you don't become the kind of person who loves doing hard things all at once. You become that person in small, daily moments, when no one's watching, when it would be easy to skip it, when the excuse is right there. But you choose differently. That's how resilience is built. Not in a single leap, but in a series of quiet, courageous steps. Reframing failure and struggle. Let's talk about something we all try to avoid. Something that can stop us before we even start. Failure. Just the word itself can trigger discomfort. No one wants to fail. No one enjoys struggling. And yet, If we're honest, most of the things that matter, things like learning a language, building a meaningful career, improving your health, healing a relationship, all of them involve moments where you fall short, where you get it wrong, where you feel like giving up. So how do we make peace with that? How do we stop seeing failure as the enemy and start seeing it as part of the process? It starts with a simple but powerful idea. Struggle isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something's happening. When you're struggling, it means you've stepped outside of autopilot. It means you're engaging, stretching, challenging your assumptions. And yes, it's uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the same as danger. Most of the time, it's just growth in disguise. Here's a metaphor I like. Think of struggle as a kind of training ground. It's not where you go to succeed right away. It's where you go to get stronger. Picture an athlete in a gym. They're lifting weights, sweating, straining. Are they failing? No, they're training. Every rep that burns, every moment that feels hard, is a message to their body. Adapt. Grow. Get stronger. And over time, the body listens. Your mind works the same way. When you encounter a challenge and push through, even if you don't get it right the first time, you're building what I like to call your resilience reservoir. That's your internal store of strength and flexibility, the part of you that remembers, I've struggled before, and I came through it. But this doesn't happen automatically. You have to learn how to struggle well, and that begins with how you interpret failure. Too often, we experience failure as a personal verdict. We take it to mean, I'm not good enough. I'll never figure this out. This just isn't for me. But what if you saw failure not as a verdict, but as a feedback loop? A neutral, useful signal that's telling you where to adjust, what to practice, or how to change your approach. This is what's known as a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities aren't fixed, but flexible. That effort and repetition can lead to improvement, even if the road is bumpy. And it's not just a motivational phrase. It's a cognitive shift. People with a growth mindset don't avoid failure. They extract value from it. They treat mistakes like stepping stones, not stop signs. Let's bring this closer to home. Imagine you're trying to speak English more fluently, and during a conversation, you forget a word. You freeze. You feel embarrassed. Now, if your internal dialogue says, I'm terrible at this, or I'll never be fluent, your brain registers the experience as a threat. It wires that moment to fear and shame. But if your internal voice says, interesting, I didn't have that word ready. Let me find it and try again. The brain responds very differently. Now it sees the challenge as a chance to grow. That's productive failure. When you struggle, but reflect. When you fall short, but stay engaged. When the experience teaches you something, instead of just reinforcing doubt. And the more often you reframe these moments, the more confident you become. Not because you've avoided struggle, but because you've learned how to move through it. Here's a question to consider. What if struggle is not something to escape, but something to explore? Not a punishment, but a proving ground. A place where you learn, adapt, and build emotional muscle? We often forget that some of our proudest moments come after a period of struggle. Think about it. When have you felt most alive, most grounded, most deeply connected to yourself? Probably not during moments of ease, but after something difficult, a challenge you rose to meet. Even if you stumbled along the way. Those are the moments that shape us. Not the perfect ones, but the ones where we stayed in the ring even when it got messy. So, here's your reminder. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to fail, to mess up, to feel unsure. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And every time you face difficulty with openness instead of avoidance, you're training your brain to associate effort with possibility, not with panic. You don't have to love failure, but you can stop fearing it. You can see it for what it is, a natural, necessary, and even valuable part of growth. Not the end of the road, but a part of the journey. Cultural narratives and the myth of effortlessness. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture for a moment. Not just your individual habits or mindset, but the cultural narratives we've all been exposed to. Because whether you grew up in Seoul, São Paulo, Stockholm, or San Diego, chances are you've absorbed some version of the same story. That the most successful people are the ones who make it look effortless. Think about it. We celebrate child prodigies. We admire natural talent. We love stories of overnight success. The 22-year-old founder, the one-hit wonder, the genius who never studied, but still aced the test. And on social media, the highlight reels never show the practice, the repetition, the sleepless nights, just the polished results. Over time, without realizing it, we begin to associate real ability with ease. And anything that feels hard, anything that takes time, that starts to feel like a personal failure. This is what psychologists call the effortless excellence myth. The belief that if you're really good at something, it shouldn't feel like work. But let's be honest, how many things that truly matter in life come without effort? Learning a new language, building a strong relationship, navigating a career change. All of these involve challenge, frustration, and trial and error. And yet, we often hold ourselves to a strange double standard, expecting smooth results from messy processes. We also live in a world shaped by what's sometimes called hustle culture, the idea that constant productivity is the key to success. This is the flip side of the effortless myth. If you're not succeeding easily, then at least be grinding 24/7. Work harder, sleep less, wear your exhaustion like a burnout badge, proof that you're serious. But here's the trap. Whether we idolize ease or glorify exhaustion, we're still avoiding the middle truth, that real growth requires sustainable, intentional effort. Not heroic bursts of energy, not zero resistance, but steady engagement with difficulty. Let's contrast two common narratives. The first says, if it's hard, you're probably not good at it. Maybe it's not your thing. The second says, if it's hard, push harder. Grind through. Don't stop till you drop. But both of these miss something essential. That effort is not a problem to fix, or a burden to bear. It's a natural part of doing anything meaningful. What would happen if we stopped seeing effort as a red flag, and started seeing it as a normal, even valuable, signal that we're stretching? What if we celebrated perseverance with the same enthusiasm we give to talent? Because, here's the truth, no one tells you on the highlight reel. Most overnight successes took years. Most fluency in a second language was built in silence, frustration, repetition. Most so-called geniuses practiced, studied, and failed more than they succeeded. But we rarely see that part. And when we don't see it, we start to believe that struggle equals inadequacy, that if it doesn't come naturally, it probably never will. Let me ask you, have you ever felt embarrassed by how long something took you to learn? Or ashamed that others seem to get it faster than you? That feeling, that quiet self-doubt, often comes not from reality, but from a performance narrative we've inherited. The idea that we're supposed to be impressive, efficient, and ahead of schedule at all times. But growth doesn't work that way. It's messy. It's non-linear. It takes what it takes. And different cultures reinforce these ideas in different ways. In some places, hard work is deeply respected, but burnout is normalized. In others, ease is admired, and anything that looks like struggle is quietly judged. But across cultures, one thing is consistent. We rarely see the full story of effort. We see the product, not the process. And that can make us question ourselves when we're still in the middle of becoming. So here's the mindset shift. Effort doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. You don't have to be the fastest, the most gifted, or the smoothest. You just have to be willing to stay in the game, to show up, try again, and keep choosing the thing that stretches you, even when it doesn't look impressive from the outside. Let's reframe effort, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to be proud of. Not a sign of failure, but a sign of commitment. Not something to rush through, but something to respect. Because when you stop comparing your messy middle to someone else's polished finish, you begin to see that your effort is not a delay. It's the path. And every time you choose to keep going, especially when it's not easy, you're not falling behind. You're building something real. Building a personal philosophy of effort. Let's come back to you. Not the person you're trying to become. Not the version of yourself you've been taught to chase. But the person you are, right now. Listening, thinking, reflecting. You've made it through a full journey in this episode, exploring the brain, identity, habit, culture, failure. And now we arrive at perhaps the most personal part of all. What does effort actually mean to you? This isn't a question with a right or wrong answer. It's a question of values, of alignment. Because at the end of the day, no strategy, no productivity system, no motivational talk will stick if it doesn't connect to your own internal compass. That's what we call conscious intention. Making choices based on clarity, not pressure. Based on what matters to you, not what simply looks good on paper. So, what do you believe about effort? What role does it play in your life? Is it something you associate with struggle and sacrifice? With pressure and perfectionism? Or is it something quieter? Something more sacred? Here's a different lens to try on. What if discipline isn't punishment, but devotion? That phrase, discipline as devotion, shifts the meaning completely. Discipline in this light is not about force. It's not about self-denial or rigid control. It's about care, commitment, showing up for something you deeply value again and again. Even when it's hard, even when it's invisible, even when nobody is clapping for you. When you treat effort not as a tool for proving your worth, but as a practice of alignment, everything changes. You're no longer doing hard things to impress others or meet some invisible standard. You're doing them because they reflect who you are, or who you're becoming. And that's where intrinsic motivation comes in. The kind of motivation that isn't dependent on praise, grades, followers, or external rewards. It's the motivation that comes from within, from meaning, from a sense of purpose. When your actions match your values, you don't need constant reminders. You might still face resistance, but underneath it, there's clarity. Now, this doesn't mean effort will always feel inspiring. Some days, effort looks like showing up tired, confused, or unmotivated. Some days, effort is simply staying with the process, But the point is, you've chosen it, not because someone told you to, not because you're afraid of failure, but because you've decided, this matters to me. Let's pause here, and I'll ask you, what kind of effort feels meaningful to you? Not just useful, but true. What activities, goals, or routines make you feel more connected to yourself, even if they challenge you? What kind of discipline would you be proud to call your own? Not because it's impressive, but because it's honest. Because when effort is aligned with your values, it stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like integrity. Here's the truth. We all live by a kind of personal philosophy, whether we're conscious of it or not. We tell ourselves stories about what's worth our energy, what we can handle, what we should be doing. But the real power lies in choosing that philosophy, refining it, questioning it, rewriting it as you grow. So I invite you to write, or at least imagine, your own philosophy of effort. It doesn't have to be long, just a sentence or two. Something like, dot. Effort, to me, means showing up even when I don't have all the answers. Or colon. Discipline is how I care for what I love. Or even point. I do hard things not to prove my strength, but to meet myself in motion. Whatever your words, make sure they come from you, from your own experience, your own desire to live a more intentional life. Because ultimately, training your brain to love hard things isn't about pushing harder. It's about relating differently to effort, to discomfort, to who you believe you are. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to return to what already matters and commit to walking toward it, one deliberate step at a time. So here we are, at the end of this conversation, or maybe, more accurately, at the beginning of something else. Because while this episode may be drawing to a close, your part in it is just starting. We've explored a lot today: the neuroscience of resistance, the cultural myths that distort our view of effort, the inner stories we tell ourselves, the micro-challenges that help us grow, and the power of redefining struggle not as a threat, but as an invitation. And now, the question becomes simple. Not necessarily easy, but clear. What will you do with this insight? This isn't about overhauling your entire life overnight. It's not about making some dramatic declaration or chasing a new version of perfection. It's about one thing: starting small and starting deliberately. It's about choosing today to lean into just one thing that feels slightly uncomfortable, but deeply worth it. Something that stretches you, not to impress someone else, not to meet some invisible standard, but because it aligns with the kind of person you're becoming. You could start with a tiny challenge. Speak one sentence out loud in English, even if your accent isn't perfect. Say no when you usually say yes out of guilt. Work with focus for 10 minutes, even if you feel scattered. Walk into a situation you usually avoid. Pause before reacting. Ask a question you're afraid to ask. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours. And when that moment comes, when your brain begins to resist, when the old internal voice whispers, "This is too hard. You're not ready. Maybe later." That's your cue. That's the doorway. Because that's the exact moment where you begin to retrain your response. Not by pushing yourself with force or shame, but by showing up calmly, kindly, consistently, like your own coach, like someone who believes you're capable of change and willing to walk beside you through it. Because here's the thing: effort doesn't mean you're failing. Effort means you're engaged. It means you care. It means you're not asleep at the wheel of your own life. And that matters. That's something to be proud of. You don't need to wait until you feel brave. You just need to act as though growth is possible. That's the secret. Confidence often follows action, not the other way around. You become the kind of person who does hard things by doing hard things. Gently, repeatedly, with curiosity, not criticism. So, I leave you with this. What's one challenge you've been avoiding? Not because it's wrong, but because it's uncomfortable? And what might happen if, instead of turning away, you turn toward it? Not to conquer it, not to rush through it, but simply to meet it as you are, open, aware, alive. Can you allow effort to become an act of care? Can you let discipline be something that connects you to yourself, instead of something that exhausts or punishes you? This is the work. Not flashy, not always visible, but deeply meaningful. And it begins exactly where you are. Start small. Choose growth. Become your own coach. You've got everything you need to begin. Thank you for spending this time with me on Code Your English. I hope this episode offered not just ideas, but openings, new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. If it resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. And if you feel ready, take a step, no matter how small, in the direction of your own growth edge. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and above all, keep practicing being the kind of person who can meet discomfort with intention. You are not behind. You are becoming.